you looking to sharpen your budgeting skills? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast, where we talk about life, family, and how to afford it. And now, the Budget Couple themselves, Nate and Danielle.
Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast. I'm Nate.
And I'm Danielle.
And on this episode, we're going to cover the story of how we recently went into $60,000 of debt and our reasons for doing it.
So the two things that got us there were buying a car and also getting solar panels on our house.
We probably, and by probably, we definitely did not need to spend what we spent on either of them, but we're going to talk about the reasons why we really went into that. And there's two good reasons why. Number one is we're going to use the money that we got from the solar panels on the car to help refinance our house, which long term would save us a lot of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Particularly given the our interest rate that we are currently paying on the house before our refinance was at 4.25%. And when we refinanced, it went down to 3.875. And just a little bit of math will show you that's a lot of money saved over the lifetime of the loan. So it was a good choice for some reasons, but probably dumb in other reasons. And we're going to go into a little more detail.
Yeah, we're only 2 years into owning our house. So refinancing 2 years in is kind of crazy because that means you've reached about 20% of the house and we only put 5% down. So there was a lot of payments that we worked on and we got close, but we weren't there on our own. And we had to really work to try to figure out how to get there closer so we could refinance before the interest rates went up like they did after the election. The other reason we wanted to do this was we wanted to take advantage of tax incentives. With the solar stuff, at the end of 2017, the tax incentives for that were supposed to go away. Now, they continued into 2018, but we wanted to make sure we took advantage of that because at the time of looking at solar panels, those were not extended. And the same goes with cars. The car tax incentive program works on the setup of the first 200,000 vehicles sold by whatever company gets the tax benefit. After that, that tax benefit starts going away. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to take it. And I'm also super interested in electric cars, so it's something that I just wanted to look at, and I've been researching for a long time.
So interested that he actually wanted to get a Tesla and made me put $1,000 deposit down at one point.
Tesla Model 3 is no joke, but it's still not out. And in all honesty, we probably would have missed this tax incentive for that. So we pulled our money out of there. It was $1,000, fully refundable. We pulled our money out of there and we started shopping around for other electric cars. And we wound up getting a Nissan Leaf, which is probably the babiest of all of the electric cars out there. But it's a lot of fun to drive. I think we'll both agree that it's probably the funnest car we've ever driven.
It's a very nice car. The weirdest thing is the fact that it doesn't make noise the way a normal car would make noise. It actually has to make a noise when it backs up because people can't hear it if they're walking around it. So it's very strange to be in a car that sounds like it's off, essentially. It also has very nice heated seats.
Yes. And before we really dive into electric car love, because I could talk about that all day, we want to talk about why we needed a new car. Previously, we had a Buick Rendezvous. It was a 2006. At the time that we got our electric car, it was 10 years old, and it was starting to have some problems. And Danielle didn't help that when she committed some murder with our car.
Yeah, so it was actually the first time this happened to me, which is surprising given I grew up in a really rural area. But on my way to work, I had a deer jump into my car and commit suicide. So
suicide, I call it murder. Either way, the deer did not survive.
My car lost an eyeball and drove home, and I had Nate patch up the eyeball, and I was able to drive it for a while. But we decided the amount we'd have to pay to fix it up was not necessarily worth it since it was an older car, and we were already considering this electric option.
Yeah, the car needed probably about $1,500 worth of repairs. It needed new tires. It needed a new windshield because the windshield was broken. All told, this thing was probably going to cost us about $2,500 to get everything fixed up for a car that already had about 120,000 miles on it. Now, we're not big drivers. I drive 8 miles to work, and Danielle drives about 12 miles to work. So round trip every day, we're driving less than 50 miles. Not a big commute, and that's when you total all of our stuff up. And a big SUV, like the Rendezvous was, it's not a giant SUV in the SUV world, but it's an SUV. And we were spending a lot of money on gas. We were talking about like $75 to $100 a month in gas, depending on fuel prices. And that was just a lot of money. So we started looking at the electric option. It's a lot more efficient for short trips like we do. And it just worked out better for, I think, what we needed.
Yeah, I tend to agree at this point. I was a little skeptical at the beginning. I didn't like the idea of buying a brand new car. I like the idea of buying used cars because usually that's more cost effective. In the case of an electric vehicle, it's not because of the amazing incentives you get. And we're going to go into that a little bit more, but there's some real benefits to an electric vehicle, and Nate's going to go over those here with you.
Yeah, so when we started looking at cars, all of the cars give the same incentives if you're an electric car person. So in Maryland, where we live, the state gives you $3,000 for buying an electric car, which is fantastic. The federal government, no matter where you live in the country, gives you $7,500. So we're looking at $10,500 back on our taxes right away just for owning one of these vehicles, which is phenomenal. Not to mention that the cost savings as far as operating and maintaining is next to nothing on these cars. It doesn't need gas. You plug it into your house. It doesn't need an oil change. It doesn't need transmission. The only liquid this car takes is when you need to go and put windshield washer fluid into the car, and you need to rotate the tires every 7,500 miles. Other than that, this car is pretty much maintenance free. It doesn't require anything. And as far as price to charge, our electricity rate is about 12 cents a kilowatt hour, which is pretty average for most of the country. And to go about 300 miles, our car has a range of roughly 100 miles or so. It costs $8.50 worth of electricity to go 300 miles. Now, when you compare that to a normal car to go 300 miles, that's a tank of gas. And depending on where you're at with that tank of gas, it could be a lot more or a lot less. Like our rendezvous was about $75 to $100 to go that same 300 miles. So the cost savings add up very quickly on that. Where we have a Civic as well, which gets great gas mileage, that one costs between $20 and $30 to go that same 300 miles. So we're really starting to add up the savings just in that alone.
So a couple other good things about it was the 0% financing. We were able to just... Typically, we would try not to put ourselves in debt. We would try not to finance, particularly for a slightly lower purchase like a car. And if we scrounged around and saved for a couple months, we could have paid for it in cash. But there was 0% financing, so it was an option just to let us have that smaller payment every month for a while. And if we want to go to pay it off, we can. But it's just we don't have to worry about any interest on it. We also were able to get quite a bit back with our incentive program with the taxes. So the base price of the car was $32,000. There was quite a bit of, sales going on at the dealership at that time around the Nissan Leaf. So we got ours for $23,500. And then on top of that, the state gives the $3,000 and the federal gives the $7,500. So the real cost actually was around $13,000 for a brand new car.
Yeah, and you really just can't beat that. For a brand new car that has 5 seats, fully functional, it's not a huge car by any means, but it works really nicely for us. For $13,000 for a brand new car that comes fully equipped as far as I'm concerned, that works. And we jumped on it. We decided to go through it and see what would happen. And I think we've been very happy with our purchase.
I would say if you're considering an electric car, I would say the one thing to consider would be the range that you're able to take it. You can't take it on long car trips unless you're willing to stop along the way to refuel it, so to say, at various stations throughout the country. There are quite a few of them popping up more and more, but even if it's one of the fast chargers, it will still take you at least a half hour. So it's something to consider. For us, we use it mainly as a commuter car, so it's not a big deal to drive 8 or 12 miles each day, or each way, should I say. But if you do drive more, it is something to consider.
Yeah, it's a perfect secondary car. It's a perfect commuter car. It's really works well for our lives. It might not work well for everybody, and I totally understand that. But it's really fun to drive, and it just works for what we needed to do. So that's perfect for us. Now, that's part of our debt. The much bigger number were our solar panels. Our solar panels out of the door, everything included, was a total of $36,000, which is a ridiculous number.
This one killed me.
And in all honesty, this is the one that took me a lot of convincing on Danielle's part to do for Danielle. The car, we knew that we needed a car, and she's not a big car person, but I think that I could show the benefits of it well enough, and just by the math alone, it made economic sense. The solar panels were a little bit harder of a sell.
Yeah, I definitely had trouble with this one. He's actually been talking about solar panels for years, I would say. Even well before they were popular, he kind of had it in his head that he wanted to get these someday. And we did look around at, well, I should say he looked around and then kind of presented the options to me, which for me is a much better way to go about it if you're trying to convince me of a big ticket item. And maybe that's how some of you are out there. But I didn't want to have to do the research for something that I wasn't particularly interested in or sold on. But him doing that and presenting the options worked pretty well for me. He went and looked at some of the companies out there that allowed you to rent them and just get the benefit of the reduced electric bill, but not actually own the system. That didn't allow you to take advantage of the tax incentives, and it also didn't allow you to add to the value of your home. So we looked through everything, and he actually had a couple companies come out and talk to us, and we went with a little bit more of a local company, not one of the larger national level programs. And he can tell you a little bit more about how he came about that.
Yeah, so I did some research online, nothing big deal, and I just called some companies to come out, and we found one that we really liked. And they were straight with us. They talked us through the whole thing and presented all the options. There's no secrets, no sales pitch or anything like that. It was very low pressure. And at the end, we decided to go with a system that provided 100% of our energy. That's still waiting to be fully realized. I believe last month was the first month where we produced more energy than what we actually consumed. And that's kind of expected for what we did, because at the wintertime and the late fall, the sun angles for what we're doing are much lower, so we don't produce as much energy at our house. Now, during the summer, spring, and early fall, we'll produce way more energy than what we actually consume, and we'll be producing money. So we'll be making a lot of energy and making money back during half the year, and the other half of the year we'll kind of use that up and kind of even out the money that we've made.
It's a hard pill to swallow when you get the panels installed during the bad months, and to not really see the benefit right away, and to see your electric bill basically the same, maybe $10 or $20 less here or there. But now that we're in the spring, we are starting to see some real growth of our electricity.
So let's just go over the numbers. It was $36,000. Now, the $36,000, as far as the tax incentives go, 30% of that is covered under a federal tax incentive. So $10,800 of that comes back to us in taxes. Another $1,000 comes from the state of Maryland, which we're actually still waiting on at time of recording here. So we have that part of it set up. In addition to how this was established is that the $36,000 was taken out by two loans. One loan was for everything that wasn't covered by the federal incentive. That was roughly $25,000. And that $25,000 was at a 7.25% interest rate, which I know sounds bananas crazy, because it absolutely is. That is a massive interest rate. I've never paid interest at all for anything that high. We've had cars, houses, never paid interest that high, and we've never had a credit card that late, so we don't have to worry about that.
Unfortunately, at least I'm trusting Nate on this, it is standard to the industry. It wasn't that we got a bad deal necessarily, but it's just a kind of a high interest rate item.
Yeah, it's just when you look at personal loans of similar sizes, the interest rates are there or higher depending on what you go with. So $25,000 is taken care of by that interest-bearing loan. And then the $10,800, I'm just going to call it $11,000 for simplicity's sake. That's a 0% interest loan that we have for 1 year. So we got our panels installed in mid-October, and we have that interest-free till mid-October. At that time, if we don't have that money paid off, it goes on to the interest-bearing loan. Now, the idea here was that you take that money, that $10,800, when you get it back at tax time, you just give it right over to the bank, and you just get rid of that loan entirely. That's not where our thinking was at. Our thinking was that we take that money that we get back and we can put it onto the house so that we can refinance. There's a problem with that, though, is after we got our solar panels installed and after we got the car and all this other stuff done, our mortgage company actually called us and asked us if we wanted to refinance with them sooner, before we ever got the tax money. This was probably late November, early December.
Yeah. And originally I immediately said, sorry, we're actually waiting until we get this money back, actually, and then we're going to refinance, because we wanted to get to the point where we were at the 20% marks. We had 20% into the house, and that would allow us to get rid of PMI, or private mortgage insurance, which a lot of people, if they're first-time home buyers and don't have a huge down payment, 20% in other words, are forced to have this PMI onto their mortgage. So it was, I think for us, it was about $150 a month, which is substantial, $150. So we were trying to get to the point where we could get enough equity in our house to get that taken off and to get our interest rate to a much lower point. But after talking to them, we were misunderstanding the fact that it's 20% on the value of your home currently rather than what you paid for it. And since we already had the solar panels on there and we'd done some light improvements on the house, we actually got it reappraised and we were at the point of that 20%. So we ended up getting refinanced then and there, and that freed up that tax money that we had coming to us from the car and the solar panels.
Right. So we wound up really doing well with that, where we didn't need to throw that extra tax money on the house because we had already refinanced, we had taken care of that. And we could have thrown that money on the house, but we chose not to because we wanted to get rid of the high interest loans first. Not that 7.25% is crazy high, but it's way higher than what I've ever paid, and we didn't want to do that. So we took the money that we got back at tax time and threw it onto the solar panels. Now, in theory, our money that we should have gotten back from the federal government between the car and the solar panels was $18,300. We did not get that much money back. And the reason for that was that in addition to the normal tax incentives that you have from having a kid, from insurance on your house, all of that stuff, plus the money that we got back, it was actually higher than the amount that we paid. And the federal government will not pay you more money than what you've given them, which makes sense. So what happens now is that we have about $5,000 that's owed to us by the federal government that will come on next year's taxes. So this is kind of like, I'm going to say a gift that keeps on giving, but it's a gift that gives for 2 years. So we have the money that we got back. We really basically owed nothing in federal taxes this year. We got about $15,000 back. And then they still owe us another $5,000 for next year, which is awesome.
Yep, very cool. We're definitely happy about it, and I would say, don't use this as a way to get maybe a personal loan from the government or anything. I would say go into it definitely with a plan. We had a clear set of goals in mind for this originally to help us refinance the house, but also there's multiple reasons. It's not just the money. We do care about the environment, and it's important to us. And since we are able to put some money into an electric car and solar panels, we felt it was important and a good thing. It did end up working out monetarily. And it's yet to be seen how all of this will kind of play out over time, but the numbers worked out pretty well for us, for now at least.
Yeah, and just to give you an update on where we're at as far as how much money we owe on our solar system, again, the total cost was $36,000. As of time of recording, of that $25,000 loan that had the interest-bearing part of it, we have $2,200 of that left. So we have less than a tenth of that part left to pay off. And we haven't even touched the 0% interest one. So we still have all $10,800 of that. Bare bones, we've knocked out about 64% of the total cost of the solar panel in about 8 months or so.
But again, a good portion of that is from the tax incentives.
Yeah, $15,000 of that is from tax incentives. It went straight from our bank account right to there.
Yep. And the car, we are still paying our normal payments on the car, which is, just to give you an idea, it's a little over $300 each month. And since it is a 0% interest rate on the car, we're going to probably just keep that loan as is and just leave it and keep paying the minimum on it. What we want to do after we finish paying the solar panels is to let all that extra money that we have each month go towards the house again. So this is how we originally had it. We originally were paying all of our extra money towards the house. Once we're done with these solar panels, we're going to go right back to that. It's the next highest interest rate on our debt, and it's at 3.875. And we feel like it's more important to be throwing money at our house rather than paying off the car, which is 0% interest currently.
Yeah, we really want to get the house paid off because that $1,700 a month that it opens up to us gives us tremendous flexibility and allows us to pretty much do whatever we want financially. So that's a big important goal for us. But before we get there, we have our solar panels to pay off, and then we'll eventually get over to the car. But the car is not that big of a deal because it's 0%. And I know that represents a little bit of risk, but it's a risk that we're willing to take because in our emergency fund, if we happen to have some type of life-changing event, in our emergency fund, we could write a check today and pay that thing off. So it's not a giant risk as far as I'm concerned. It's a one that we're willing to take.
Yep, I agree.
And just one other thing on the solar panels that we didn't touch on. We didn't touch on how much that interest would, or that payment would be if we were paying every month on it. The payment comes out to be about $200 a month, and that's a 20-year loan. So that interest-bearing one on 7.25% over 20 years means we're paying about 2.5 times what that value of that loan originally was. We wind up paying roughly $75,000 for our solar system.
That makes it not as worth it. If going in that was going to be our plan, then I wouldn't have okayed it. it wouldn't have been okay. So there are certain things you need to think about, beyond just, okay, we're getting this. There's some tax incentives. It's going to help the environment. We went a little deeper and really did some hard, not really hard, but hard math on this to make sure it made sense and we were getting our money's worth.
Yeah, and we also have an agreement with an energy trading company called SREC that we get about $90 a month from, and that's guaranteed for the next 5 years. So they're not only generating money for our house as far as energy coming in and our lower electricity bill, which we're starting to see really big gains on, we're also generating money guaranteed for the next 5 years. When you add that up, that's another $5,000 or so that the solar panels will eventually pay us. So those things are not all the time going to happen, but in our circumstance, it worked out, and the math really works out well for us. Being able to take that large amount of money and pay it down as quickly as possible, we're hoping to have everything paid off by about this time next year. So in about a year and a half, we'll have $36,000 worth of debt paid off if everything goes according to plan, and we can start working towards our next goal, which is knocking down the house and maybe doing some other improvements.
Definitely. And again, it is a risk to go into this much debt, even though we had a plan going in. It is something to think about. We didn't take it lightly, and I don't think anyone should take it lightly to go into that much debt.
No, it really scared, I think, both of us to do this. Even though we had a plan, we knew what was going to happen, and it's worked out the way we thought it would. It's actually worked out better than we thought it would, but it's still scary. And if that fear bothers you, don't do it because it's not going to make it fun. I enjoy looking at what our solar panels are doing every day. I enjoy paying one gas bill a month for our car because that's basically what we have to do now. But if that fear is going to cause problems for you, don't approach debt that way.
And I'll add one last thing that it's important to look at your budget. We've talked about in previous podcasts about our budget. And if you have a solid budget and you can look over it and see how whatever you're planning on purchasing, how it fits into that, and to make sure that it's not breaking that in any way or making it so that you go beyond what you can pay each month, that's just something important to consider, just to make sure that it fits into your actual budget.
Yeah, so if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the show notes or our contact page on our website, and I hope that we can help you with your budgeting issues.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Budget Couple Podcast with your hosts, Nate and Danielle. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit budgetcouple.com. Make sure to check out the next episode of the Budget Couple Podcast, where we'll talk more about life, family, and how to afford it. We'll catch you next time.